Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of the THE Asia University Summit 2025. We're here at the Macau University of Science and Technology, MUST, and this is the second day. I hope you all enjoyed yesterday. I think most of you were here yesterday, and I hope that you enjoyed the gala dinner and the Asia Awards last night, the venue, the food, the glitz, the awards, the wine. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got some good rest last night. Thank you for those who came to the Campus Plus session this morning. I'm sure you agree it was incredibly valuable, very useful, interesting. And now we begin the main proceedings in the auditorium here today. Our humanity is intrinsically tied to our cultural diversity. What role does higher education have to ensure that scientific progress doesn't ignore and inadvertently erase this diversity? From Cultural Infusion, their CEO and founder, Peter Mousaferiadis, is here to deliver his keynote on humanity in the lab. We're incredibly lucky to get Peter to come here from Australia at incredibly short notice. Some of you may have filled in a survey that we were promoting, and for those of you who filled that survey in, some of the results that Peter is going to share in this keynote are incredibly interesting. I hope you enjoyed this session. It's very different to what you will have heard before, and probably to what you will hear in the rest of this summit. So do enjoy it, and good luck. Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bhavat, and good morning, everyone. Last month, I went to London and Paris and spent 3 weeks there delivering talks and meeting various clients, including UNESCO. And I'm wondering why I had to travel all the way to London and Paris when Macau has London and Paris. You don't need to look too far. In my provocation titled, Humanity in the Lab, Why Science Must Reckon with Culture, I hope to ignite the idea that science has an important role to play in solving global challenges. Let's be honest, science has a tendency to ignore the fact that what we do must be done for all of us. For us humans, and what defines humans is culture. Yeah, my name is Peter Mousaferiadis, and many have difficulty pronouncing my surname. For me, it's quite easy. I had a career for 20 years as a conductor, composer, and creative director of some of the largest intercultural productions in the world before turning my attention to trying to understand this seemingly nebulous concept called culture. If we are to solve the challenges today, we require both scientific precision and human understanding. As someone of Greek heritage, I know Pythagoras, Hippocrates, Aristotle, and so many others blended science with philosophy, ethics, arts, and culture, embodying this concept of unity of knowledge. Across cultures and continents, we see the same pattern. In China's thinkers like Confucius, Zheng Kuo, Zhang Heng, and Li Shizhen pursued knowledge that wove together philosophy, science, and ethics. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars such as Ibn Sina, Al-Khazin, and Al-Kindi embraced a similarly integrated worldview where understanding the natural world was inseparable from understanding the human condition. The unity of thought was the norm across much of the world. And yesterday, during the opening, we heard President Ho speak to how the world is becoming more interdisciplinary, and that we need to fuse information together, and that the problem of lack of data coming together is a problem we all have. The question President Ho put to the audience yesterday has been resonating with me, to the point where I woke up early this morning, quite early. The question was, what is the ultimate purpose of doing this work? Before we can answer that question, I think we need to understand how we arrived at this point. So what happened? The scientific revolution and the European Enlightenment of the 16th and 17th centuries ushered in a powerful new era of discovery. Empirical methods, objectivity, and reductionism became the hallmarks of progress. These tools led to extraordinary breakthroughs. but they also divided knowledge into silos. Science became increasingly institutionalized, and the humanities were gradually seen as separate, even inferior, framed as subjective, while science was celebrated as objective. Universities mirrored this split, creating distinct faculties and disciplines, and so a chasm emerged, one that still shapes how we understand the world today. In ancient traditions, sciences and the humanities were never separate. They were both essential to understanding the human experience. The philosopher and the engineer, the poet and the astronomer all sought the same truth: what it means to be human and how we relate to the world around us. As we now face deeply interconnected global challenges, climate, conflict, displacement, inequality, it's time to reclaim that unity. Because peace, true lasting peace, is not born from understanding ourselves alone. It comes from understanding each other, from building systems that are wise enough to embrace diversity and strong enough to hold it all together. So before we can make sense of today, let's zoom out. Let's take a broad lens on what it has, let me go back to that slide, on what it has meant to be human over the last 200,000 years. It's been quite a long journey for all of us to be here today, in this room at this time. The human race can be defined by an ongoing flux of migration and conflict. What has made humans stand apart is their capacity to adapt to the environment. The reason for this is because of our capacity for culture, to teach and learn from each other. We create cultures and we exist within them. And what do I mean by culture? I am referring to how we give expression and meaning to every aspect of our life. The reality is that the human race has been on a phenomenal, rapidly accelerating journey for 200,000 years. And we, along with tardigrades, expanded to every corner of the globe, including the Arctic and the Antarctica. Tardigrades are little tiny water bears. Look them up. From 100,000 BC to 10,000 BC, the global human population remained stable at about 1 million. The primary reason for this is that humans were living through the Ice Age. The Ice Age was super critical in development of the modern human. It allowed us to develop the capacity to reflect deeply. At around 10,000 BC, humans came outside of the caves and began to cluster into bigger groups, forming the first civilizations. It took 12,000 years to reach 1 billion people in 1804, and 123 years later, the human population became 2 billion in 1927, 3 billion in 1960, 4 billion in 1974, 5 billion in 1987, and then halt in 1989. The bringing down of the Berlin Wall was described by Fukuyama as the end of history as we knew it, the bringing down of barriers. It was also the same year that Tim Berners-Lee gifted us with the World Wide Web. Within 3 decades, the world experienced massive economic globalization without globalization of values and ethics. We are now living in this super diverse world, this hyper diverse world, where time and space have been compressed, and the ability to relate to each other has become more important than ever. In 2022, we became 8 billion, the same year ChatGPT was given to us in November. In less than 100 years, we've quadrupled in population. So where are we now? And let's go back to 2008. By 2008, social media had truly exploded onto the scene. Social media exploits a biological survival mechanism that has evolved in us over the last 200,000 years. Fear, and it's also big business. Algorithms are designed to keep us in echo chambers, not to liberate us, but to shackle us. Combine this with well-intended social justice frameworks, and what do we get? A world where our identities have been flattened into 1 or 2 attributes, often policed and rigidly defined. Yet as humans, we are extraordinarily complex. Social media promised so much in helping us understand each other, but instead it seems to have made things worse. These two graphs show the rise of social media on the left and rise of global conflicts on the right, a very similar trajectory. We are dealing with rapidly escalating costs of conflict, up to $19.1 trillion in 2023, according to the Global Peace Index. And according to UNESCO, 75% of all conflict in the world has a cultural dimension, equating to $14.3 trillion. Is there a correlation between social media? Me thinks yes. So my question is, if culture-based conflict is so ubiquitous, why are we not putting culture at the heart of all education, development, progress, innovation? Now let's layer. Oh, sorry, let me go back there. Oh. Okay. Now let's layer in the cost of exclusion, the economic, social, and human toll of gender inequity, disability inequity, and racialized inequity. While these figures are only estimates due to a lack of reliable data, what's clear is the cost is immense, and it's one we are paying for. We've calculated around $20 trillion for that, and these numbers do not include the cost of organisational conflict that we experience on a daily basis. So you'd think, with all the advances we're making in science and technology, we'd be moving toward a better world, a more peaceful one. And as we heard yesterday in the opening address by numerous speakers asking how do we harness this technology and brain power that exists within the Greater Bay Area to make a difference and foster inclusivity so the world benefits. But let me tell you, the data that I've been presenting demonstrates that peace has really been on the decline, and it's been steadily deteriorating according to the Global Peace Index. Which brings us to a pressing question. What will be the impact of AI on peace if we resist the urge to rush its adoption, and if we design algorithms that are deeply aware that we don't start from the same place socially or culturally, then AI could actually help reverse the trend. But if we don't, we risk amplifying the very inequities that are already undermining peace. So what's gone wrong? I already referenced the European Enlightenment that spearheaded a lot of the amazing scientific progress that has enabled such rapid growth. But not everyone was a fan of Enlightenment. This is a painting by William Blake of Isaac Newton, one of my personal heroes and a towering figure of the Enlightenment. In Blake's image, Newton is shown with a single-minded focus, drawing with a compass, absorbed in measuring and calculating, but blind to the living, breathing, swirling universe around him. I'm not saying there are scientists in this room like that, but I do wonder, in all of the science's incredible achievements, has something vital been left out? Incidentally, when I see this painting, it reminds me of being on public transport, surrounded by people immersed in their phones, fixated, zoomed in, focused on something precise, while the world hums and pulses around them, missing the opportunity for deep connection with the other and nurturing values such as empathy and compassion that President Nancy Ip spoke to. Yes, the arts can be integrated into the sciences and the humanities in medicine, as we heard yesterday. Right now, medical interventions are costing us hundreds of billions of dollars, in part because they fail to represent the full spectrum of people around the world. Our biological differences matter, and so does the way we respond to medicine. Ignoring that comes at a steep cost and an enormous missed business opportunity. Now, back to the painting. Blake's painting isn't just about Newton. It's about a way of seeing, a way that chases certainty, fixes things into categories, seeks control. But in doing so, science, in its modern form, has often left behind complexity. It's complexity that defines the world we live in now. And if we ignore the complexity, we miss something essential, not just scientifically, but humanly. So let me ask the question now about Newton, a question he may have never asked. What is diversity? Diversity is not just a social value, it's a form of complexity. Complexity and diversity are intrinsically linked because through complexity in any system, whether ecological, social, technological, emerges from the rich interplay of diverse elements working in dynamic relationship. Knowledge is based on the diversification of ideas. Diversity is everything. Today, diversity, often grouped with equity and inclusion, has in many cases been narrowly defined through the lens of social justice. While well-meaning activists aim to correct injustice, this limited perspective can sometimes unintentionally reinforce the very divisions and dynamics they seek to dismantle. No one thing can be diverse. Yes, diversity is an aggregate of two or more things, and it's unfortunately we don't understand this concept in its entirety. In my culture, when we translate the word diversity into Greek, it literally means difference. Here's a diversity framework that we've created with our organisation applying 4 metrics. Let's take language as a dimension of diversity and apply it to this framework. Let's say in one group we had 2 Italian and 2 Mandarin speakers, and in another group we had an Italian, French, Portuguese and Spanish. There would be greater variety of languages in that second group. We can create an algorithm of that. It's not difficult to do. The second metric is disparity. What is the dissimilarity of those languages? So that second group, the Italian, French, Portuguese and Spanish, think of another group now, which is Italian, Mandarin, Arabic and Native American Cherokee. Where do you think the distance would be greater? One's ethno-linguistic background shapes cognitive processes. The next metric is balance. What does the distribution of those languages look like across an organisation? And how often do you see in an organisation, the further north you go, there might be less diversity. Today we might have gender parity, but that's come at a huge expense, and I know that. Well, I used to sit on a committee with 10 men and 6 women. Now there's 8 men and 8 women. And where before there were 6 of us of a non-English speaking background, I'm the only one left. The next metric is mutuality. To what extent does this organisation reflect the community it's delivering products and services to? The genesis for this idea was Ashby's law of requisite variety, as well as one of the principles of thermodynamics, the second principle around entropy, which basically states that any system, if it's not as equally as varied as the environment it's operating in, will create tension and probably disappear. So, what about cultural diversity? What if I told you cultural diversity is intrinsically linked to human identity and is an area that science has grossly neglected? If you wanted to develop a strategy to manage cultural diversity, what aspects of culture would it be for? And once you could work that out and disaggregate that concept, then you would need inclusive data sets to make sure you're not leaving anyone out. Who would it be for? Until 2014, this concept had been poorly defined, analytically neglected, and it was in need of robust understanding. So we decided to put a team together of subject matter experts from a range of different disciplines to try to define this concept. It took us 5 years, a literature review based on hundreds of articles and books to be able to define this concept, and I'm going to speak to it later on. So once you've defined cultural diversity and disaggregated it into various categories, then the next step would be to develop the robust classification system. All of you here, especially the scientists, understand the importance of classification. Some of you might even be botanists. The level of categorization from kingdom down to species is what we expect when we talk about plants. And that's for a good reason. Humans make sense of complexity by organizing it. Classification helps us to know how to interact with something, how to care for it, how to work with it. Differentiation matters. If we take this level of care to understand the unique needs of the species of a moss, as you see in this slide, then why don't we do the same when we think about people and cultures? We often talk about diversity in broad, vague terms, But real diversity isn't about ticking boxes or clumping people into broad categories or boxes such as other. How do we develop a strategy for those in the other? It's about acknowledging the specificity of context, identity, history and values. The same way a botanist would look at root structures, soil preference or flowering patterns. If we fail to do that, we make assumptions. And like plants, cultures aren't static. They evolve, hybridize, interact. They're adaptive, alive, global, just like ecosystems. So here's a question for us as scientists, educators and global citizens. What is cultural diversity really? So when we think of the world today, we know there's 193 full member states, 2 non-member states, and all the overseas territories and special administrations, such as Macau. In our organisation, we've identified more than 11,200 languages, speech communities, and their variations. More than 10,000 cultures, ancestral groups, ethnicities, and tribes, including more than 8,000 secular and non-secular traditions. Now, intersect that against a range of demographic dimensions, and we all become as unique as a fingerprint. Do we treat cultures with the same nuance we treat plants? And just like biodiversity, when cultural diversity is ignored, erased or undervalued, systems become fragile. Every culture is a library of solutions to the human condition. So now that I've alluded to the complexity of human identity, it's important we now have comprehensive data sets to ensure that everyone is included. When we don't have inclusive data sets, survivorship bias gets the better of us. Some of you might know the story of Abraham Walt, who escaped Europe because of his Jewish heritage. He arrives in the United States of America and the US Defense Force snaps him up straight away. They take him to a warehouse full of bombers riddled with bullets. And he says to them, "So what? What are you showing me?" And they said, "Well, can you tell us where to put armour on the planes?" And he turned around to them and said, "You're showing me the wrong planes. What about the planes that haven't come back?" Of course, they couldn't do that because they were on enemy lines. They were on the bottom of the sea. He was able to work out through a process of elimination that the planes that weren't coming back were being shot in these highlighted areas. But the story is not about planes and bullets, but more how we often make decisions based on only what we can see rather than what we can't see. So foundational data is extremely important because when we have partial data sets, it can lead to disastrous outcomes, strategies which never reach their target. So what did we do with our organisation? We disaggregated cultural diversity into 4 distinct areas. Country of birth going back 3 generations. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how we disaggregated cultural diversity and the methodology, and more importantly, the definition for each of those. But once we disaggregate it into those 4 distinct areas, we can then intersect it against a whole range of demographic dimensions. And better still, we can start to get a sense of how identity intersects with experience. We have incredible insights. When we look at organisations with 10, 20, 30, 100,000 people, we see insights that can inform strategies with much greater nuance. Underpinning this platform, this technology that we've developed, which uses enormous computational technology and is underpinned by the global database of humanity. And we use a citizen science-based approach where we are constantly feeding into it. Every organisation has a cultural diversity index. And you can take your pencils out now if you want, or you can take a photo of what you see on the screen, and you could work out the diversity of your own organisation if you wanted. There's also a QR code there. And if you haven't done the culture survey, please take it. I'll be showing it once again. So, diversity in many ways is like a Rubik's Cube. You solve one side, but you ignore the rest. You might line up one side perfectly, but in doing so, you throw others out of alignment. That's what happens when we focus on just one part of a person's identity. We miss the bigger picture. A truly Holistic understanding of humanity means recognizing that we are all made up of many layers. Everyone carries a unique, intersecting set of identities. And it's in this complexity that our real richness and our biggest challenges lie. I now come towards the end of my presentation. The concept of taking a holistic approach is not new. In fact, I go back to my culture once again, because a lot of people like me would say the Greeks invented everything. The word for peace is erini, derived from the verb iro, which means to string together in a circle all the essential elements into one and a state of equilibrium. Coincidentally, over 2,400 years later, the Global Peace Index echoes this ancient idea. It defines peace through a multidimensional lens, built on 8 foundational pillars and measured by 24 indicators. Like beads on a string or links in a chain, if one is broken, the whole is weakened. Peace is not a single condition. It's a system of interdependent parts. My work, the work of trying to understand the full complexity of human identity, has only scratched the surface. And I've been dedicated to this since 1988, when I started putting these data sets together. I remain convinced that if we bring together the sciences, the humanities, and technology, we can begin to reverse the decline of peace. Because peace, true, lasting peace, comes not just from understanding ourselves, but from understanding each other. It emerges when we build systems wise enough to value our greatest asset, our collective cultural heritage. This is called cultural diversity, the full spectrum of diverse cultural expressions and how they interweave within a well-functioning society, and strong enough to hold it all together. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And there's a picture there of Aristotle. Aristotle said that all wisdom starts with knowing yourself. I have the QR code, and please, if you haven't done the survey, this is the opportunity to experience the Diversity Atlas survey. I will be showing it again. My team sent me these results. I can share with you. Okay, okay. This is the diversity mapping. We had 29 participants that participated in the survey, 12 countries of birth, 20 ancestral groups, 28 languages and dialects were spoken by those 29 participants, and more than 6 distinct worldviews and branches. This is the gender breakdown and the amount of people that declared that, whether they had a disability or not. Most common countries of birth. 7 countries selected only once, including Australia, Uzbekistan and Maldives. My country of birth was the highest cultural identity priority. I'm just going to move through these quickly. These are the languages, the top languages that were spoken. No one spoke Esperanto or Klingon. The amount of times we do this survey at tech events, and there's so many Klingon, and what's the other one? Dothraki, I think it is, that people select. These are all the language zones. So the way we structure the data and the background allows us to look at that metric of disparity. Okay? These are the most common secular and non-secular traditions. And you can select more than one, you can select up to 4. These are the common ancestral and cultural belonging groups. I'm just moving through this quickly just to give you a sense of the real-time data, comprehensive insights, not only into the extent and type of cultural, but a whole range of other demographic dimensions of diversity. Okay. We notice that when we look at the identity pluralities, the top one is the same, country of birth, but when it comes to the second most important category, it's my occupation for women and education for men. And back to the very end. That's a slogan that I coined for the UN campaign back in 2013. When I developed that slogan, I wasn't just thinking about developing social cohesion. I was thinking about the numerical system and how that's come about as a convergence of Hindu, Hellenic, Persian, and Greek thought coming together that's given us a system that we're all using today. I was thinking of the contribution of indigenous cultures towards medicine. I was thinking of the bionic eye and how that's come about as a result of many different disciplines coming together to give something to humanity which would have probably seemed impossible. Knowledge is based on the diversification of ideas. And I could go on forever and talk about what inspired me to come up with this slogan, which I tagged onto divided we fall, united we stand, diversified we grow. Thank you. I'm going to open it to the floor for one question. Thanks. Do we have a question anywhere?
Thanks, Peter. That was an amazing talk. Without getting too political, my question is more about the current environment globally is looking at getting rid of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives in certain parts of the world. How do you think that's going to fare for places like Asia and Australia?
Well, I think this is a huge opportunity for the Bay Area because there's a lot of innovation coming out of this area, and I think we can start to look at this concept in its entirety and apply a scientific methodology. We know that more diverse and inclusive teams are 6 times more innovative, 6 times more responsive to change, 87% better at decision making. So why wouldn't you want to embrace diversity? The problem is, which I referenced in my speech, that we haven't taken a holistic approach to this. We've looked at this concept of race and we've pluralised it when there's no scientific basis for it. I think we've got difficult times ahead. We need to be able to convince those that are pushing back that whilst we understand the pushback, we need to all lean in towards the centre. Thank you very much.
Wow, what a fantastic way to start the day. Makes us think in a very different way. Thank you so much, Peter, for that insightful keynote. And just to remind everybody, to all delegates who have registered for this summit, the recordings of most of the summit, certainly everything that's taking place in this auditorium and in the movie theatre, their sessions are being recorded, they're being filmed, and they will be available online on the summit website. So you have to log in, and then you can view it. You can't download it, you can't share it, but you can certainly view it on the website. So if you want to go back and listen to Peter's presentation again, try to unpick some of the things that he said, you most certainly can do that.